Hi there, welcome to Five from the Archive. This time it's Kas Stone, and we are on episode number 10. I can hardly believe it. Kas takes her own approach to talking about her 5 images and also her journey. I am sure you will love this. There's lots of great conversation in there and lots of great ideas too. Kas, thank you so much for coming along to share your 5 from the archive with us today. I know a lot about you. Well, I think I know a lot about you, Kas, actually, because we've known each other for quite a long time. We've had some lovely conversations together, and I think we have similar interests and similar enjoyment areas in photography. I think we look for the same thing, and I think we appreciate each other's photography.
I really appreciate the invitation to do this. It's great fun.
Thank you. And for people who are coming to watch this, lots of them will have already seen your presentations on Camversation because we've always enjoyed them. We've always thought they were intelligent and articulate and cleverly put together presentations. They're not just a showcase of images, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. They're really thoughtful, really, really thoughtful. But I would love to know more about you and love to share more about your background and your history. Yes. Am I okay to pass over to you just to give us a few minutes on that before we share your 5 from the archive?
Absolutely. I'd be glad to, Mark. I mean, the short version of my background is pretty pedestrian, really. It's similar to many of the other photographers, especially landscape photographers that you've interviewed. Um, I've always loved spending time outdoors, hiking, paddling, camping, ever since my childhood back in the 1960s, I hate to say it. So eventually I picked up a camera to record the beautiful scenery and the outdoor experiences. That led to becoming a little more serious in the 1990s, and I've evolved photographically ever since. The longer version, so that's really the end of that's the whole of my story. But there's a longer version with a few more twists and turns and more personal background that to sort of flesh that out, that I hope will make the story a little bit more interesting and also will help to explain why I make the photographs that I do and some of the challenges that I'm having with my images now, because I think these challenges are shared by many people who listen to Camversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I very much look forward to hearing more about that then. Thank you.
As I said to you at the beginning, I hate seeing myself on screen. So what I've done, unlike some of your other interviewees, is to prepare a set of slides which give you a visual tour of my background. So if you don't mind, I'll start sharing my screen and we can maybe look at them instead of at me.
Let's go for it. Thanks very much.
Great.
So, Kaz, we've got this on the screen now. I haven't seen any of this because I am so keen to experience this for the first time with everybody as well, Kaz. I'll pass over to you to start whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So, because we're focusing on 5 from the archive, I wanted to start by sharing 5 influences that are significant to my photography and to my life. So, the first of my 5 influences is my father. He was obviously my earliest influence. Dad was a lifelong, serious amateur photographer and also a lover of the outdoors and the natural world. He took his camera with him everywhere. And every house we lived in had a dark room in the basement. And when the supper dishes were cleared off the table, he would be there spotting his prints. And all of his prints were on the walls of our houses. And our family outings were always in the outdoors, hiking and paddling and that sort of things. So his photographs were all of rocks and trees and seaweed. As you can see in the picture here of the one of the lighthouse, this is Peggy's Cove Lighthouse, in famous place in Nova Scotia. And that is his idea of a family portrait. That's my mother and my brother and me standing beside the lighthouse. But of course, it's not really a family portrait. It's a picture of rocks and textures and clouds. And so that was my dad. So I think I got this visual sensitivity by osmosis right from the beginning. And of course, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I've grown to appreciate it. And ultimately, it had a huge influence on my own photography, to the point that many decades later, my dad and I had a joint photography exhibition that we called Stones on Stone, because of course our last name was Stone, and we both enjoyed photographing stones. So we did that the year before he died. So I'm so happy that we had that opportunity. It was wonderful. And then the second influence on my life and my photography is moving. Some people move frequently all across the globe. So what I've had happen in my life probably won't seem like much to them. Other people, of course, spend their whole lives in the same place. For me, it's been somewhere in between. I calculated that I've had 17 house moves in my 65 years of life, which, when you do the math, it's an average of 3.8 years in any one place. Although, of course, there are times I've spent time in longer time in certain places. The maximum, though, was 7 years in one place. And many of these moves have been over significant distances. And by that, I mean geographically far enough away that I didn't know anybody. So I had to build a whole new life and effectively reinvent myself. And it also required a lot of job changes. So I've had a rather checkered past, shall we say. I've worked as a secretary, who hasn't, veterinary clinic manager. I was a textile craftsperson for a while. And one of my favorite jobs was actually as a cartographer. I only did this for a year back in the 1980s, back in the days of pens and letter sets. I didn't even have a computer. And I also, with a friend, taught navigation in the 2000s. So I've always loved maps. And this map shows my universe for those of you who aren't familiar with Canadian geography, the eastern half of Canada. And those red stars are all the places that I've lived. And it's across 3,400 kilometers of eastern Canada. And I did spend some time briefly in the UK as well, in Surrey. So the result of all this moving around was that I developed a very strong sense of place, but I also developed a restless sort of spirit that led to a perennial search for home. And it's natural, therefore, that place, i.e., landscape, has featured strongly in my photography.
I had no idea you're interested in cartography. I'm a real map lover myself, and I know lots of people who listen are. So, really fascinated to hear such a diverse background. It must all have helped you to become the person you are in so many ways today.
It certainly did. I've never specialized in any one thing. I've always had a huge variety of interests, from the arts to the sciences, although all across the map, and I could never quite decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. I think I've more or less got it figured out now, but it took decades for me to realize that. So that was my second major influence. My third influence is my personality. I call myself a loner. Maybe a soloist would be a better term for it, or an introvert, free spirit, perhaps. My mother would say I'm stubbornly independent. That would be another perspective on it. Whatever it is, it's a very strong need for solitude and space and silence. And it explains why I've spent my life living mostly on my own, with a dog or a cat, usually. It also explains my preference for living in non-urban settings. I've never been happy living in cities. It also explains why all my travel and holidays are to wild places. I don't go on the European tour of great cities looking at architecture and museums. I go into the wilds of Labrador or that sort of thing, because that's where I feel most comfortable. So it was, again, natural for me to gravitate towards landscape and nature photography, because that was wild and I could be alone. There was minimal human interaction in those places.
And has that minimal human interaction manifested itself, you think, in your photography as well? I know I'm lucky enough to have one of your books, and I think there is a real theme of I'm not meaning loneliness, but definitely a theme of minimalism, simplicity,
Yes.
reducing things to the kind of the main elements without any erroneous interaction at all.
I would agree with that. Yes, the simplicity, minimalism, the fairly structured. I pay a lot of attention to exactly what goes where in a picture, and I try to get rid of everything that I think doesn't belong there. So yes, I think it does show up in my personality. Definitely shows up in my
Mm.
work as style, I suppose you'd
Yeah.
call it.
I'm interested in what came
Yeah.
first. Maybe this is something for later, but I'm interested in whether it was that approach, that innate kind of desire to reduce things to their minimal elements, their lowest
Mm.
elements, or whether it was the fact that you enjoy exploration alone that influenced that. I'm kind of interested as to what came first with that. That may not be something we can answer, really. I don't know.
Well, I suspect they reinforce each other, but the personality definitely started me on the path to doing things solo and going out, for instance, in the wintertime. That's my favorite season. Well, nobody else is out in the winter. Nasty, snowy day, blizzard conditions. Everybody's hunkered down with Photoshop at home. I'm not. Those are the days I get in my car and drive around taking pictures. So you're not going to find anybody else out on the road. So I think the two things reinforce each other. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
thank you very
interesting.
much.
Great. So my fourth influence was, I'll call it philosophy. Perhaps it was because of my frequent moves or maybe my solitary nature. Again, the chicken and egg thing. I've spent a lot of time searching for meaning and purpose in life. Now, I know we all go through this, and especially in our teenage years, that teenage angst that we all have about who are we and what are we doing on the world, on the face of the earth. I took it so seriously that I ended up doing an undergraduate degree in philosophy in the 1970s. I got my degree at the University of Toronto, and I've done a lot of ongoing reading and thinking along these lines. And that definitely has shown up in my photography. I've incorporated philosophy and meaning into the practice of photography. I'm always trying to create meaningful photographs rather than just pretty pictures. And I've, in recent years, started trying to teach other people how to make personally meaningful images. And in fact, some Camversation members have attended my talk about this that I did last year. So that's another my significant influences.
And these images that you shared in your presentation were absolutely stunning and created so much evocative response with people, really challenged
Okay.
people's approaches. Do you feel that that's drastically slowed you down as well as changed your approach? Because you said you don't set out to take pretty pictures, you set out to take meaningful images. So are you
Yes.
finding that you're reaching for the camera far less because you spend longer thinking and planning before you go for the shot now? I'm just interested in that.
Actually, I don't spend much time thinking and planning. In fact, I'm absolutely the opposite. I will take my camera and go somewhere without any idea at all of what I have in mind for a picture. I don't generally have a meaning or a purpose in mind ahead of time. The meaning and the purpose usually come about during the editing stage after I've made the photo, after I've taken the original picture. So I'll just pick up my camera and go somewhere. That's as much planning as I do. I decide, well, I'd like to go here today or there for a 2 week holiday. But it's not with particular photographs in mind. It's just because I want to experience the place and go for a hike or take my canoe out and go paddling or my bicycle and go for a bike ride on the trails. And I come home with photographs that mean something to me because of the personal experience I've had during the outing. But then it's a matter of how do I take that at the computer and then create an image based on the raw captures that means something not just to me, but potentially to other people, to viewers as well. So the last of my five influences is writing. And this is where my mother, I don't mean to exclude my mother from the conversation. My mother's influence comes to bear here because she is a lifelong book lover. She was a librarian in her career and also an editor. And this writing is actually where I got my start as a photographer, because after decades of living in the relative wilderness of Canada's Atlantic coast, this is where I grew up here in Nova Scotia. Family circumstances took me to Toronto in the mid 1990s. And Toronto is Canada's biggest city, 2.5 million and just in the main part of Toronto, and something like 8 million in the surrounding area. Doesn't compare with London, I know, but it's big for Canadian standards. So I'm not a city girl. I used to escape. I was just desperate to get away from the city. So I used to escape north. That's where you go when you live in Toronto, in search of that solitude and wilderness and the quiet thinking time that I so desperately needed. And then I started writing articles for outdoor and nature magazines and newsletters. And eventually I got a contract to write 2 paddling and hiking guidebooks. And you can see those in the bottom right-hand side of the screen there. And I needed photographs to illustrate these, hike here, see this. And so I had to show them a picture what this was. And that's when I bought my first serious camera. And it was a film camera, and it was about the year 2000. And so you can see how these 5 influences came together and started me on my photographic journey. And you can you can imagine what happens next. I realized pretty quickly that my photographs were terrible. I asked my dad for advice, and he gave me a book, and he told me to join a camera club. So I did. I joined a camera club in 2004. I learned a huge amount through my participation in that club, not just about how to use my camera, but also composition and that sort of thing, and also Photoshop. I bought all the gear, of course. I went through the whole cycle that we all go through, starting with the cheap point and shoots and going up to the full frame cameras with 2.8 lenses. And I've backed off significantly since then because I'm getting too old to carry it around. And I experimented with different genres of photography, and I competed and I exhibited in local shows. And I found all this very personally rewarding as well as photographically helpful, because I found a community of my people. And I actually started to make some friends. Well, I became, of course, the club president eventually, and I did the courses, became a competition judge. I started teaching and presenting. And I finally even sold a few prints to somebody I wasn't related to, no friends and family. So it was that over the course of 5, 6 years, I gradually evolved from a hobbyist to then a full-time professional. And that transition to full-time professional work coincided with my move in 2013 back home to Nova Scotia. And the last decade, I've spent as a full-time self-employed photographer. It's my sole source of income. I don't have a partner. There's no other place for money to come from. So that's put a whole new twist, as you can imagine, on my photographic work. So I make my money from selling prints. It was the primary source of my income, is selling prints at gallery exhibitions and at craft fairs. And I supplement it by doing workshops and presentations. And I've done a variety of other interesting photography projects. And I have continued to write, but now it's articles for photography magazines and books related to photography. And it's been a huge privilege for a little more than a decade now to work full time at something I love, but it's also challenging because the demands of the photography business are increasingly at odds with my personal photographs and my whole image making philosophy, which has evolved significantly from its start. And we'll see all of these things in my 5 images from the archive.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this, especially as I imagine your personal philosophy, your personal approach to images is very, very different from what sells or what is appealing in a mainstream sense. And I don't mean that in a negative way. at all. Those kind of
No,
chocolate box images. That
yeah, they're two completely different things.
but it is also what makes your images unique, and I think that's the strength,
Yes.
Cass.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. It's good to know that other photographers at least appreciate my work, even if the general public doesn't want to buy it.
You're among friends.
I'm among friends. Exactly. It was been fascinating,
Yeah.
actually. Like all the other people you've interviewed for this Five from the Archive, I found picking just five pictures from the tens of
Yes.
thousands in my archive. First of all, it was challenging, but also really enlightening. And I wasn't sure how was I going to organize my five. And I ended up deciding that I would select five images that chart the course of my photographic and personal life over the past 25 years so that you can kind of see the evolution of my work. And with each picture, there's kind of a theme that comes up when we look at the pictures. So if that's okay with you, Mark, I'll launch
Oh,
into them.
absolutely. Please do. Thank you.
Great. So here's the first one. It's called Lake Superior Evening, and I made it in May of 2010, but it could have been any time in the decade before that as well. And it was taken during a wilderness paddling trip on Lake Superior during one of my many escapes from Toronto. And this is a location that is not accessible, not easily accessible. I had to paddle to get there. And the island that you see in the distance is Pick Island, which is famous from the work of the group of seven. Lauren Harris did a number of well-known paintings of Pick Island, and he was a great inspiration for my work as well. So that's what you're looking at in the picture. And why I selected this particular image is just to show you that it's typical of my images in the 2000s. That classic landscape photograph, wide angle, tack sharp front to back, golden evening light, all of those things. And typical also of the kind of representational style of images that I made to document the scenery that I was traveling through and to celebrate beautiful wild landscapes. And I loved the experiences of going to these places, and I loved the pictures that I made as a result. And even when I got home back to the big bad city, I would processing the pictures helped me to relive the experiences. So this is very typical of my start in the photographic world as a landscape
Do you
photographer.
think, perhaps along with several other people, when you started, to use your phrase, when you started as a landscape photographer, it provided some sort of structure to base it on similar examples you'd seen in paintings and previous compositions?
Yes. I did. I had a number of friends that photographed in the same kinds of locations, and I would look at their work and I'd say, "Oh, it's so beautiful. I want to go there. Where is there?" And I would find out, and then I would go there and I would make the same kind of pictures that they were making. So the classic, how everybody trails off to Iceland or they trail off to the lavender fields of Provence or whatever it is, they're following in the footsteps of other people who've discovered these things and celebrated these things before them. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's so inspiring for all of us, but it tends to lead to rather repetitive pictures. And sometimes your inclination is to go a bit over the top. How much saturation can I throw into this picture to make it look just that much better than the guy who was here before? So there's a tendency to go in that direction. Now, here's the second one. So this one is called Northern Light, and I made it in October of 2013. It was during the very last months that I was living in Toronto, and I was very restless and unhappy. My father had died the year before. My dog had just died. I was in the process of trying to get away from Toronto and move back home to Nova Scotia. So life was in a huge turmoil. And this image was my first serious composite image. It was ingredients from two completely different places and different times. The sky came from Quebec's Gaspé Peninsula in 2008, and the water and rocks came from Georgian Bay in Ontario in 2012. And I blended the two together and created the lighting effects on the water. And it was my way of trying to create a landscape of my imagination for myself when I was stuck in a place that I wasn't particularly happy. And it represents my evolution away from traditional representational landscape photography and even abandoning any pretense of reality. When you look at this picture for more than just a minute or two, you realize, it probably didn't really look like that. And to be honest, at that point, I was tired of showing what a place looks like. I wanted to show how it feels to me, an expressive and conceptual kind of image instead of a documentary image. So I started using my photographs as just raw materials, as ingredients. And I would save various ingredients in what I call my banks. I have a cloud bank and a bird bank and a tree bank. And I make deposits and withdrawals as needed to create the work that I create. So there was significant processing involved in these, which required a proficiency with Photoshop that I had developed by then, to the point that I actually enjoyed sitting at the computer creating landscapes from my imagination. Now, a lot of your presenters on Camversation use techniques and things like textures that make their images look obviously unreal, very artistic, but not the least bit realistic. Whereas mine, even when there's been significant processing done, they often look more or less real. And that can present sometimes a bit of a challenge when talking to people about my work.
Did you find at this point that you then became more satisfied, to use want of a better phrase, because you're moving further away from representational and more into the feeling at this point? Did you become happier or more fulfilled at this point, Cass?
Yes, but I wasn't unfulfilled or unhappy with the images that I was making before. That first picture I showed you, the Lake Superior evening, I was perfectly happy making that picture. It's just that after a while, how many pictures can you take that have a rock or a tide pool in the foreground and, a leading line and then a mountain or a lake or something in the background? They all start to look more or less the same. And I'd find myself standing on a rock with my wide angle lens thinking, oh my goodness, I've made this picture so many times. What's different about it today? So I started to get bored with that kind of work. And I wanted to see, well, what else can I do with these ingredients that are here in front of me? So I wasn't unhappy with the image making that I was doing in the decade before. It was just a kind of, for me, a natural evolution from the documentary style to the more, I'll call it creative, I guess, less representational style.
I love the idea of the recipes and the image bank. I love the idea and the ingredients. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. It's great. So my third image is this one. It's called A Maritime Evening. And I took it near my then home shortly after I moved back to Nova Scotia. And I lived in a little tiny community of Dublin Shore, which is near Lunenburg. If anybody's been to Nova Scotia, they may very well have been to Lunenburg. So the reason I'm showing it to you is that it's typical of the images that I made during the first few years after I moved back to Nova Scotia, because the coastal landscapes were beautiful and exciting. I was so happy to be back in Nova Scotia. So I celebrated them in the same kind of way that I had celebrated Northern Ontario when I'd been trapped in Toronto and was going up on holiday there. I was kind of back to somewhat more representational work. But of course, celebrating these landscapes in beautiful light, like this one, gorgeous peachy evening light, or in stormy conditions. I was forever out there. In fact, I was torn between this image and another one, which showed waves crashing on a rock. And again, how many pictures of waves crashing on rocks does a person really need in their lives? Well, I was out there every single storm. I was so excited about it. And because this coincided with the time that I started doing photography professionally and selling my prints, I found that this kind of image, this sort of picture with the shed and the dory, the boat, or crashing waves pictures, they were very commercially successful because they were pretty pictures again. And pretty pictures appeal to the public as wall decor. I'd have people coming up with a picture on their cell phone of the bathroom wallpaper, and they wanted a picture to match the bathroom wallpaper. So, that's how they make their decisions about what they're going to buy. And for tourists also, it was a picture like this one would be a memory of a happy holiday that they've had in my location because I lived in the middle of a tourist area. My problem was that although I loved this picture when I made it, now I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. Sick of looking at it. I almost resent the fact that it's been commercially successful. But because it sells and because this is how I make my living, I have to make pictures like this, rustic buildings, crashing waves, that sort of thing. But I find them now not particularly artistically challenging, and they're not any longer personally meaningful to me. I mean, I'm used to living here in Nova Scotia. Now, again, I've been here for more than a decade. And I've moved on. I've evolved mentally, emotionally, and artistically. So beautiful images like this one that, follow the rule of thirds. I mean, how many thirds can you pick? Can you find in this picture? In gorgeous golden light. I'm tired of making pictures like that. So although it's successful, I have a love-hate relationship with pictures like this.
It must affect your motivation as well.
It does. It's huge. I'll go out and I'll say, well, I know that this is the kind of thing that will sell, and therefore I should take the picture, but I don't feel particularly motivated. And it's tough to make pictures when you're not feeling inspired yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't sit well with me. I don't like making pictures like that way. I said I've evolved. Well, this is the kind of image I've evolved to. This one comes from a local park after a blizzard in January of 2022. And the reason I'm showing it to you, of course, is it's the kind of image, the style of image that I prefer to make now. It's carefully composed and edited, or sometimes constructed, although this one isn't. And it's constructed to express an idea or a feeling. So the images I make now are much more conceptual. I use landscape elements as metaphors often, and you could see it in this case with these trees. You could think of them as anthropomorphic trees. They're all, if you notice, not a single tree is touching another tree. They're all separate. And then there's that one quirky little one in the middle with his funny little branches, almost as if he's reaching out to try and make contact with the others. And so I called this picture, the title of it is Divided We Stand. And for obvious reasons, because nobody is touching. And it, to me, expressed the kind of disconnection that is so prevalent in our modern world. And not only that, but it's made in winter. It's my favorite season. I love winter minimalism, as we talked about before. But winter generally doesn't sell. The public hates winter. They're all hunkered down indoors. The only time you can sell winter pictures is around Christmas time, especially for Christmas cards. Also, it's an intimate landscape. The public generally wants identifiable landscapes, preferably with a horizon and preferably with gorgeous golden light. So these bald tree trunks in the snow definitely doesn't sell, but it's the kind of image that I enjoy making most of all.
I also think this is almost a signature style, isn't it? In the sense of, I could see this,
I think
and I could see this was one of your images. Arguably, the previous one a little bit more ubiquitous. It could have been.
Could be anybody's. Yeah. Anybody who happened to be standing there with a camera in their hand would have made the same kind of picture. Whereas most people, well, they wouldn't be even outside on a day like this. But if they were, they probably wouldn't bother to stop and make a photograph of these trees.
I know there's
So
a
yes, I
commercial
think
aspect at play here, and I know that we have to sell images to stay alive. I appreciate that. As an artist, though, this must provide you with a sense of, if you like, enormous personal fulfillment in the sense of,
it
yeah,
does.
because you see
Yeah.
this and you know this is yours. You know other people could identify this as being yours as well. And that must almost elevate you as an artist.
Yes. When I post an image like this, for instance, on Facebook, I'll get about an eighth of the number of likes that I would if I posted the previous picture. But the likes that I'm going to get are going to be from the half dozen people whose artistic opinion really matters to me. And if that happens, then I'm perfectly content. So, my last of my five from the archive pictures is this one, which I call Winds of Change. And it's my most recent image. It was made in August of last year, 2024. And the reason I'm showing it is that it is representative of a significant change, both personally and photographically in my life. Personally, it was another change, another move, another change of location. I moved from a tiny coastal community to a mid-sized town in Nova Scotia, the town of Truro. And Mark, you and I have talked about this before, but I chose this location because it was central and because it had conveniences. In my last little community, it was a half hour to 45-minute drive to get even a liter of milk, and it was an hour and a half to the nearest dentist. So the novelty of that wore off pretty quickly. And the move was also commercially necessary because my business, the photography business, suffered hugely with COVID and the remoteness of the location that I was living in. And to be honest, the move was also partly a personal revelation. I've always almost prided myself on being a loner, but I think I finally realized that I need people. I actually enjoy being with people as long as I can contain the amount of time that I spend. And of course, I enjoy the urban conveniences. So that was on the personal level, but it also represents a big change for me photographically and artistically because I'm moving increasingly far away from the traditional landscape format towards more conceptual, I don't know, what you call them, fine art images. I'm starting to include many more human elements and a much harsher, moodier aesthetic with challenging and mysterious subject matter like this one. You wouldn't necessarily know what is this that you're looking at. In fact, it happens to be on the edge of a golf course in my new town of Truro. And it was as a storm was rolling in, these dramatic clouds and high winds were blowing the netting. And they have the netting up there, obviously, so that people don't whack balls into the neighbor's house. In this case, the neighbor was a car dealership, so they didn't want all the vehicles with broken windows. So this is the kind of work that I prefer to make now, and it's representative of the challenge that I know I face in the future, which is to achieve a better balance between my commercial and my personal work. Less home decor and perhaps more exhibitions where I'm showing to artists and to art appreciating members of the public, and also to teaching because fellow photographers also enjoy these kinds of images that are more thoughtful, more meaningful, and less pretty pictures. And so that kind of brings me to the end of my five from the archive.
Thank you so much for putting this together, Cass. I just wanted to say on this image, in fact, on all of
Yes.
your images, I think everyone would agree with me that they're images which question. They ask questions and they force you to think while you're looking at them.
Yeah.
And I think that is perhaps the journey that you are still moving on, isn't it? Because we're always on these journeys, but that's definitely where you are, is that your images are thoughtful, intelligent, and force you to really consider them. They don't give you answers straight away. They ask more than they
Yeah.
answer, if you like.
Thank you, Mark, for seeing that. That's what I'm always hoping for in my work now. There's nothing, I can still go out to a beach or to some beautiful landscape, and I can still make those kinds of pictures and really enjoy the experiences. But my appreciation of them has become a little bit warped because of the commerce involved. And so now I find myself almost deliberately going out to make pictures that I know won't sell, because for the last few years I've been avoiding making those pictures. I sort of look and it catches my eye, but then I think, oh well, that won't sell. There's no point in taking the picture. Well, no, that's definitely wrong. So I've now forcing myself to make all those pictures that I've been avoiding, pictures that really speak to me personally, but that don't necessarily have a hope of selling to anybody.
And where are you going next? I mean, not necessarily home wise or life wise, but where's next on your photographic journey? What are you finding yourself drawn to now or drawn to next?
Good question. I think more of this kind of image, working much more with human elements included in the pictures, having ideas for projects on a certain theme, and then going out and trying to explore that theme with images and with text as well. So putting things together for exhibitions. I've got a couple of exhibitions lined up for the year ahead. And so I haven't got ideas for them yet. And I'm really looking forward to doing those without necessarily a hope of selling anything, but just doing it for my own sake, which I'm really going to enjoy.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's what we should title the podcast, Doing It for Its Own Sake or Doing It for Your Own Sake.
I would encourage other people to do it as well, because so often we're shooting for other people. We're shooting for Facebook, or we're shooting for competition, or, it's all about what does the viewer want to see? Well, that's fine. It's nice to be appreciated, but ultimately, what is it that turns your crank? What do you enjoy? Never mind photography. What is it in the other parts of life that you really enjoy doing? And then somehow make your photographs speak about that, and that you get much closer to who it is you are, and showing the world who it is you are. I'm not a golfer, by the way.
Yeah,
This is not right business.
or a used car salesman, obviously.
No, but I love dramatic skies. And a lot of my pictures make use of storm clouds. I just love, maybe I'm a drama queen, but it shows up in a lot of my.
Superb. Thank you so much for this, Cass. I really have enjoyed it. It's been a real pleasure.
I do, Mark, at the very end here, I know a lot of your other people that you've interviewed have had a person that they've recommended, another photographer who inspires them. But because I started out as a writer, I decided that instead of recommending a person, another photographer, I would recommend books that have inspired me instead. So I just wanted to share my 5 from my library archive books that some of your viewers might enjoy reading if they're on the same kind of wavelength about making meaningful pictures. And all of these are about the heart and soul and artistry of photography instead of the craft and technique. There's almost no discussion of gear and technique in any of these books. They focus on ideas. And in fact, 2 of these books don't include any photographs at all. They're entirely text. And that's which one's The Beautiful Anarchy by David Duchemin, and Letting Go of the Camera by Brooks Jensen. Guy Tal's book, More Than a Rock, that probably had the most profound effect on the development of my work with respect to the timing. And I read that book in the first edition. It came out in 2015, and it was perfect timing for my evolution to more contemplative photography. The one at the top left, a book by Freeman Patterson, a very well-known Canadian photographer, that was the first book that my father gave me when I asked him, Dad, how do I make better pictures? He handed me that book, and I still return to it intermittently, and I get something new out of it every time, not because it's saying anything different, but because I've grown. And all of these authors have written multiple books and magazine articles, and many of them have blogs or newsletters. So I encourage everybody watching today, follow up, to have a look if they're interested and just see what these people have to say, because they've been a big influence on my work photographically as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kas. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend this with us.
Thank you, Mark. I've thoroughly enjoyed putting this together, and it was an eye opener for me, just figuring out how was I going to talk to you today? What did I want to say about my work and my life? And I probably said way more than anybody really wanted to hear, but there we are. You can edit half of it out.
I will not at all. Kas, it's been a real pleasure as always. Listening to you is fantastic. Seeing your work, seeing your evolution is always, always inspiring. And I know there'll be people who've taken a lot from this. So thanks very much for taking the time to share with us today.
Thank you, Mark. It's been my pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed putting it together.